Well, Iran and Saudi Arabia have agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations and reopen embassies within 2 months. That's after a 7-year diplomatic breach, which has fueled tensions in the Gulf and deepened conflicts from Yemen to Syria. The agreement was reached after talks in Beijing, which hailed it as victory for dialogue and peace. Saudi Arabia has blamed Iran for missile and drone attacks on the kingdom's oil facilities in recent years. Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthi movement has also carried out cross-border missile and drone attacks into Saudi Arabia. Well, joining me in the studio for more on this is Daniel Gerlach, co-founder of the Middle East magazine, Zenith. Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time. This looks like a potentially historic shift. Can you tell us what's going on here?
Well, I don't think it's that historic because, of course, these are neighboring countries, powerful countries that are rivals in the Persian Gulf region. So it's quite normal. This is the normal that they should have diplomatic relations in order to de-escalate and manage their respective conflicts. However, China, as a negotiator, as a mediator, is new here because the Chinese don't have a long track record of peacemaking in the Middle East. And we shouldn't forget, of course, that the Chinese are now taking the credit. The chief negotiator and mediator was the Republic of Iraq, which is a country that has borders with Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that used to be a battlefield of Saudi-Iranian competition. And that is also worth mentioning that this has been a Middle Eastern deal in a way that the Chinese have taken the credit for. As we say, of course, success has many fathers.
Right. Well, let's come back to the motivations on both sides, because this will change, potentially, the balance of power in the Middle East. Can you tell us what the implications will be?
Well, I think the Saudi government in particular displays a new self-consciousness, or let's say self-confidence, I'd rather say, and an independence from U.S. influence. For a long time, the Saudis let the Europeans and the Americans handle their international relations in the way, because in 2016, when there was an assault on the Saudi embassy in Tehran as a reaction to the execution of a prominent Shia cleric in Saudi Arabia, the Saudis withdrew the ambassador and cut the diplomatic ties, whereas the Iranians were always saying, we have no problem, of course, we need to talk and we want to have diplomatic relations. Of course, the Saudi government considered this an affront, a provocation, and they cut ties. But of course, the Saudis were in a way not present at the table when many international affairs were negotiated, like, for example, the international nuclear deal between the Western countries, the UN Security Council powers, and Iran. So I think the Saudis, with this new self-confidence in the region, want to show that they are independent from America. And that they are making new friends, or if not friends, then at least that they are talking to their neighbors. But I don't want to say that this means that all the problems are off the table. There's many problems to address, and maybe diplomatic relations are a good start to address these problems.
I'd like to come to back to that shift from Saudi Arabia as a traditional U.S. ally. Should this be seen then as Saudi Arabia closely aligning itself with the likes of Russia and China and Iran?
Well, let's say Saudi Arabia has a fundamental interest in keeping the oil price high. And that means that it needs to coordinate not only with OPEC, but also with Iran and with Russia. So Saudi Arabia is an authoritarian regime that is not interested in uprisings, in turmoil, let alone in a liberal modern democracy. Saudi Arabia is, of course, much more aligned system-wise and sympathetic with authoritarian regimes like, for example, China and Russia. But it also shows, and this is an economic aspect which is worth mentioning, the Saudis have displayed a certain openness to trade their oil exports to China in yuan and no longer trade them in US dollars, which would be not a deadly but a strong blow for US financial interest in world economics, but in particular in the region. And so the Saudis are in a way showing, okay, we can deal with the Chinese, we can deal with the Russians, we can also deal with the Iranians. So we are much less dependent on US support, because it's no secret that Mohammed bin Salman in particular and Joe Biden are not good friends.
Well, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed there. That is Daniel Gerlach. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
For more on this, let's bring in Sebastian Sons. He's a senior researcher on Gulf monarchies for the German-based Center for Applied Research in partnership with the Orient. Welcome to DW. Now, this is being hailed as a major breakthrough. How big of a deal is it really, and what are both sides hoping to gain?
Yeah, good evening from Berlin. First and foremost, I think it's an unexpected agreement, and I think, of course, it shows positive implications to the region. From a Saudi perspective, first and foremost, it is a way to agree maybe with the Houthis in Yemen to end the conflict or at least seek de-escalations. So Iranian forces have been supporting the Houthis for years, and therefore this deal with Iran could prepare for a more comprehensive agreement in Yemen. On a general level, it shows also from the Saudi perspective a new trend towards pragmatism and commitment to achieve regional stability. And this is because Saudi Arabia wants to preserve its own business model, and therefore regional stability is a prerequisite to promote economic transformation. From an Iranian point of view, of course, it is also an attempt to find a way out of international isolation. We see Iran is in domestic turmoil and the protests are going on. There is a sanction regimes in place, and therefore Iran could use the reconciliation with Saudi Arabia also to promote more engaged activities and cooperation with China.
Mm-hmm. You said it. It's happening as many other countries are distancing themselves from Iran after its brutal crackdown on the protest movement. So why are we seeing this from Saudi Arabia now?
Timing always matters, specifically in the case of Saudi Arabia. So at the moment, there is a momentum of opportunity. This is at least the perception in Riyadh. So the situation that we see in Iran is considered by the Saudi leadership as a situation of weakness. And therefore, the Saudi leadership has the expectations that Iran could agree on more concessions, specifically with regards to Yemen, but also maybe with regards to Lebanon or Iraq that are in the interests of Saudi Arabia. So therefore, it is, from my understanding, not a strategic breakthrough. It's more a tactical rapprochement that serves the Saudi interest at the moment. But on the other hand, it is also a way maybe to improve relations with China and to show the West, specifically the US, that Saudi Arabia does not serve as a junior partner anymore and also wants to act independently by reaching out to Iran, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Now, this deal is seen as a diplomatic victory for Beijing. You just said it there. Is China's role in the Middle East changing?
I don't know if it's really changing. I think also from China, it's an opportunistic opportunity to facilitate those talks. We don't know yet how engaged China was to really bring those partners together. And when we take into consideration that Iran and Saudi Arabia were in direct talks throughout the last 2 years, facilitated by Iraq, it is not a completely start from the scratch. But you are right, China has intensified and has enhanced its impact on the Middle East. And of course, it will continue to do that, not only on an economic level. Let's keep in mind that China is already the most important trade partner for Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, but also on a political and on a military level. And this is, of course, also a signal that that is sent out that is sent to the US and to the West in general.
Sebastian Sons of Carpo here in Germany. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we want to keep talking about Beijing's involvement in this deal with Clifford Coonan, our resident China analyst. Clifford, a deal brokered by Beijing. How significant is this for Xi and his government?
I think it's very significant because basically we've seen China's economic rise for many years and we've seen its military rise, the way it's been building up its army. But for the longest time, it's want to match that rise with a sort of a diplomatic muscle that it's never really had. And it's been under pressure to do more internationally, to be a better global player. And so in this way, it's a very important development. It's also the week that's been in it. It's been quite a week for Chinese foreign policy. It began at the National People's Congress, where Xi Jinping named the US, which as a negative in Chinese development, which normally he would try and couch it in different terms, but he actually specifically mentioned the US. So I think what we've seen this week with this deal to end the week and at the beginning of the week, China stepping up its sort of resistance to what it sees as Western oppression, as Western containment of China's rise, it's been very significant.